Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so have you ever found yourself just completely glued to a mobster drama, totally captivated by the sharp suits, the intense loyalty, and all that explosive street justice? I mean, we all have, right? But today, we're going to explore the fascinating and honestly deeply blurred line between Hollywood's glamorous crime fiction and the gritty, far more terrifying historical reality. We're looking at how pop culture packages the mob, and then we are going to completely strip away that Hollywood polish to look at what the real-life mafia actually did to the city of New York.
Okay, let's dive into this by taking a look at a brand new example of that exact Hollywood myth-making. MGM Plus just recently released an 8-episode crime drama called The Westies. It's your classic tale of crime, deceit, and violence set right in the heart of 1980s Hell's Kitchen. Now, at the time, that was a neighborhood undergoing some rapid, pretty dramatic transformation and redevelopment, which, as you can imagine, makes it the absolute perfect volatile backdrop for an organized crime story.
So the core conflict of the Westies really centers on the clash between the titular Irish gang and the Italian Mafia. You've got Jimmy Rourke, this young Irish gangster trying to navigate his loyalties, going head-to-head against Italian mobsters, which includes none other than a young John Gotti. And a massive point of friction in the show is the negotiation and construction of the high-profile Javits Center. Now, the show really leans into character archetypes to serve this super familiar underworld narrative. You know the drill. You've got the ruthless crime boss, the moral criminal, the amoral criminal. It's basically a structure we've seen a million times before.
And this brilliantly illustrates why The Westies is kind of a mixed bag. The series definitely has its strengths, for sure. Titus Welliver delivers a clear standout performance as Glenn Keenan, a police informant and conflicted cop caught between the law and the underworld. The action is also a major plus. It's not overly polished at all. Instead, we get this dynamic, messy, reactive street fighting that actually feels very grounded. But on the con side, because the show relies so heavily on those archetypes we just talked about, there is literally little to no character development. They basically just move from point A to point B. Visually, the series suffers from a subdued, grayish streaming era look, and honestly, some truly awful, super distracting wigs. But hey, if you're a fan of traditional tales of underworld crime, it's still a pretty solid, safe watch.
But how does that traditional TV tale actually stack up against the real history? Well, let's move on and see how this builds a completely different picture. We're going to transition away from the fictionalized Javits Center plot of the Westies to the terrifying real-world history documented in Selwyn Rabb's definitive book, Five Families: The Rise, Decline, and Resurgence of America's Most Powerful Mafia Empires. This book literally strips away those glossy archetypes and shows us the cold, hard mechanics of the real mob. Rabb points out something absolutely fundamental that TV shows almost always miss. The real Cosa Nostra wasn't just a gang of stylized, smirking anti-heroes having cool shootouts in dark alleys. By the 1970s, the Mafia essentially operated as a surrogate state. Think about that for a second. They were an invisible, insidious force that brazenly dominated vital businesses all over the New York metropolitan area. They actually possessed the authority to manipulate municipal agencies and impose their will on the everyday life of millions of people who didn't even realize they were being controlled. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how everyday New Yorkers unknowingly subsidize these crime families every single day through what we call the invisible mob tax. When you bought fish or meat, the prices were artificially inflated because mobsters were chronically intimidating and shaking down merchants at the Fulton Fish Market. When your garbage was collected, the cost was higher due to mob extortion in the carting industry. And construction, this is wild. The Mafia extracted kickbacks on everything from suburban housing to hospitals, skyscrapers, and incredibly, even the construction of new FBI offices and police headquarters. No way, right? In a TV show, violence usually only affects other criminals, and those consequences just magically disappear when the credits roll. But the real consequences of this surrogate state were genuinely devastating. For instance, mob-rigged construction contracts in the New York City public school system caused severe physical hazards for thousands of students and teachers. Because of inferior substandard materials provided by mob-connected firms, schools literally suffered from crumbling roofs, walls, and severe electrical fire hazards. In one horrifying instance, sewage was even mixing with drinking water in a high school. This is the real-life harm that conveniently gets left out of those glamorous TV scripts. So, with so much incredible power and money on the line, the inner circle of these families was insanely guarded. So how did a real, breathing mobster actually get into this secret society?
Well, we're going to step away from the grand historical facts for just a minute and look at a visceral, terrifyingly real anecdote documented by Rob. We're going to follow a man named Tony Acaturo on a June afternoon back in 1976, the very day he was finally made.
Let's watch this mini thriller unfold. It starts with Acaturo being ordered to meet Joe Abate, this highly feared capo who actually used to be a gunslinger for Al Capone. They meet right at the bustling Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan. Then they walk in complete and utter silence because, you do not initiate small talk with a guy like Abate, straight to a clothing factory in the garment district. From there, a totally different man drives them for 30 incredibly tense minutes until they finally arrive at a simple, totally drab living room up in the Bronx. And waiting right there in that living room was Tony Dux Corello, the boss of the entire Lucchese family. Acaturo had waited 20 years for this exact moment. For 2 whole decades, the books, the membership rosters of the 5 families, had been strictly closed. To get them to finally open up for him, Acaturo had to make his bones. Basically, this meant proving himself as a relentless loan shark enforcer and a massive earner for the family over New Jersey. Only after proving his absolute ruthlessness and financial value was he ever allowed to step foot into that Bronx living room. So the crucial point is what actually happens next. It's not some long, drawn-out, dramatic Hollywood monologue. Tony Dux Corallo simply hands Acaturo a picture of a saint on a square piece of paper and just tells him to burn it with a match. As the picture literally burns in his open hand, Acaturo repeats this chilling oath. "If I betray my friends and our family, I and my soul will burn in hell like this saint." Once that oath is spoken, the stone-faced men in the room finally line up to embrace him and shake his hand. It's this collective, highly solemn congratulation. He is now officially a made man. And this really brings our explainer full circle. You see, when we look at a show like The Westies, we're highly entertained by the muscular fight scenes, the archetypal anti-heroes, and the smirk-offs between rival bosses. But as we've explored today, the reality of a made man like Tony Acaturo and the literal surrogate state run by families who happily endangered school children just to inflate their construction profits is a completely different story. The real mafia wasn't just some entertaining fiction. They were ruthless killers and extortionists who actively taxed the very lifeblood of the city. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder as we wrap things up today. Knowing the real, deeply insidious history, knowing all about the hidden mob taxes, the ruined lives, and those chilling, blood-sworn oaths in drab Bronx living rooms. Why do we continue to romanticize these ruthless figures in our pop culture? Our appetite for crime drama seems absolutely endless, even when the true historical cost of the mafia is laid bare for us to see. It's a pretty fascinating contradiction to think about the next time you queue up a mobster show. Thanks so much for learning with me today in this explainer, and I really hope this gave you a whole new perspective to view these stories through.